When Robert Kiyosaki was a young boy growing up in Hawaii, he had two fathers. One was his biological father, highly educated, hardworking, a man of integrity. He held a PhD, taught at the university, and believed deeply in the power of a stable job. Robert called him his poor dad. The other was his best friend Mike's father, a businessman with little formal education but a sharp mind for money. He owned small stores, invested in property, and made money work for him. Robert called him his rich dad. Both men were intelligent, but their ways of thinking were opposites, and that difference changed Robert's life forever. His poor dad would say, "Go to school, get good grades, and find a safe job." His rich dad would say, "Learn how money works. Don't work for money, make money work for you." As a child, Robert didn't understand these contradictions. Why would two wise men give completely different advice? But as he grew older, he realized education teaches us to earn money, while financial intelligence teaches us to build wealth. One day, after being humiliated at school for being poor, Robert asked his rich dad how to get rich. Rich Dad smiled and said, "If you want to be rich, you must learn how to make money." So, at the age of 9, Robert and Mike began working for Rich Dad at one of his stores, earning 10 cents an hour. But instead of teaching them how to make money, Rich Dad was teaching them how to think about money. After a few weeks of sweeping floors and feeling angry about low pay, Robert went to complain. "You're cheating us. We work hard and earn nothing." Rich Dad laughed. "Good," he said. "Now you're ready to learn." Most people let money control their emotions. If you can learn to control your emotions about money, you'll start to master it. He explained that life pushes everyone around. Some get angry, some quit, and others learn from it. The ones who learn, those are the people who grow rich. Rich Dad taught Robert his first lesson. The poor and the middle class work for money. The rich make money work for them. He explained that fear and desire trap most people. The fear of being broke makes them work for a paycheck, and the desire for things makes them spend it all again. It becomes a never-ending cycle. True freedom, he said, begins when you stop working for money and start building assets that generate income even while you sleep. At 9 years old, Robert didn't fully understand, but he never forgot the feeling that money was not the goal, knowledge was. By age 15, he saw the results. His poor dad kept studying and earning more degrees, but struggled financially. His rich dad kept investing and learning and grew wealthier every year. Robert realized the difference wasn't education, luck, or intelligence. It was mindset. One saw money as something to be earned and saved. The other saw money as a tool to create, to invest, to multiply. And that was just the beginning of a lifelong journey toward financial freedom. As Robert grew older, Rich Dad began to teach him lessons that most adults never learn. He said, "Money is not the problem. The problem is how people think about money." He explained that most people spend their entire lives working for money, but never stop to learn how it actually works. They chase salaries, promotions, and job security, while the rich chase opportunities, assets, and freedom. One afternoon, Rich Dad asked Robert and Mike a question. Why do so many educated people struggle financially? Robert thought for a moment and said, "Because they don't earn enough?" Rich Dad smiled. "No, because they think knowledge from school is enough to make them rich. But the world doesn't reward intelligence. It rewards action and courage." He continued, "The fear of losing money keeps people poor. They play it safe. They avoid risks. But in doing so, they also avoid learning. Fear and desire, these, Rich Dad said, are the two emotions that control most lives. Fear makes people cling to their jobs. Desire makes them spend everything they earn. Together, these emotions trap them in a cycle called the rat race. They wake up, go to work, pay bills, and repeat, never realizing they're chasing an illusion of security. The rich don't work for money, he said. They work to learn. Rich Dad's lessons weren't about getting a high-paying job. They were about building financial intelligence, the ability to see opportunities where others see risks. He taught Robert that there are four main paths in life. 1. The employee works for someone else. 2. The self-employed works for themselves. 3. The business owner has people working for them. 4. The investor makes money work for them. The poor stay in the first category. The middle class moves between the first and second. The rich operate in the third and fourth because they understand the power of systems and assets. One day, Rich Dad said something Robert would never forget. If you learn to build assets, you'll never have to worry about money again. He explained that assets are anything that puts money into your pocket: investments, real estate, businesses, intellectual property, while liabilities take money out, like debts, luxury cars, or unused houses. The poor buy liabilities and call them assets. The rich buy assets and let them pay for their luxuries. The moment you start thinking like that, he said, you'll stop being a slave to your paycheck. Robert began to see the difference everywhere. His poor dad worked harder but always worried about bills. His rich dad worked smarter and created income from many sources. It wasn't luck, it was education, but not the kind taught in schools. It was the education of the mind, the courage to take risks, and the discipline to keep learning even after failing. Years later, when Robert asked Rich Dad how to overcome fear, he said quietly, "Don't avoid it, understand it. Fear is natural. It tells you where your limits are, but courage is what expands them." That was lesson number 2. Don't let fear of losing stop you from winning. By his teenage years, Robert had started to see patterns in the world. Some people worked endlessly and stayed broke, while others seemed to make money effortlessly. He wanted to know why. Rich Dad sat him down one day and drew 2 simple columns on a piece of paper. On the left, he wrote assets. On the right, liabilities. Then he said, "The rich buy assets. The poor in the middle class buy liabilities, but they think they're assets." Robert looked confused. So Rich Dad explained, "An asset puts money in your pocket. A liability takes money out." He gave examples. Your house, for instance, most people call it an asset, but if it costs you monthly payments, taxes, and maintenance and doesn't bring in any income, then it's actually a liability. The car you drive, the credit card bills you carry, the phone you upgrade every year, these are not assets. They drain money instead of producing it. Assets, on the other hand, include things like a business that earns profit, a property that generates rent, an investment that grows over time, or even intellectual property that pays royalties. That's why the rich get richer, Rich Dad said. They keep acquiring assets that create more income, and they use that income to buy more assets. He then drew a simple diagram. For poor people, the money flows in from a job and immediately flows out to expenses and bills. For the rich, money flows from assets, and they use that to cover expenses, leaving the rest to reinvest and grow. Robert realized something powerful. It wasn't how much money you make that matters, it's how much money you keep and how effectively you make it work for you. Rich Dad warned him about the trap of looking rich. He said, "Many people try to look rich before they become rich. They buy cars, clothes, and houses they can't afford and end up working their whole lives to pay for them. The rich, on the other hand, look for leverage, ways to make their money, time, and ideas multiply. The poor use money to feel secure," he said. "The rich use it to create freedom." Robert asked, "So, how do I start building assets?" Rich Dad smiled. "Start small. Buy one thing that earns instead of costs you. Then reinvest your profit into something bigger." He taught him that the journey to wealth doesn't begin with money, it begins with awareness. Once you learn to see what others don't, opportunities start appearing everywhere. By the time Robert was in his 20s, he finally understood what Rich Dad had been teaching all along. The middle class works for money. The rich build systems. The poor think about income. The rich think about cash flow. The poor ask, "Can I afford this?" The rich ask, "How can I afford this?" That one word, how, turns limitation into possibility. Rich Dad ended that lesson with a sentence that became the foundation of Robert's philosophy. You can't build wealth if you don't understand how money flows. He meant that financial freedom isn't luck and it isn't magic. It's a skill anyone can learn. From that day forward, Robert made it his mission to study how assets, investments, and businesses create wealth so that one day he could teach the world the same lesson his rich dad had taught him. As Robert entered adulthood, his two fathers' paths became clearer than ever. His poor dad kept climbing the traditional ladder, earning degrees, working long hours, and hoping for promotions. He was respected, intelligent, and honest, but financially he struggled. Rich Dad, on the other hand, was constantly learning, not in classrooms, but in boardrooms, business meetings, and through experience. He read less about theory and more about people, markets, and risk. One day, Robert asked him, "Should I find a good job or start my own business?" Rich Dad smiled. "You should work to learn, not to earn." Robert frowned, confused. Rich Dad explained, "Most people work for a paycheck. The more they earn, the more they spend. They chase promotions but never escape their financial limits. But those who focus on learning learn how to make money work for them." He gave Robert a simple example. A person who only learns to sell their time will always be poor, because there are only 24 hours in a day. But if you learn how to build systems, how to sell ideas, how to manage people, how to negotiate, and how to invest, then your income can grow even when you're asleep. Rich Dad called these the real skills of wealth. 1. Sales and communication, how to share value. 2. Leadership and management, how to guide others. 3. Investing, how to multiply money. 4. Understanding markets, how to read opportunities. He said, "Most people fear failure, so they never try new things. But failure is your best teacher if you learn from it." Rich Dad explained that the real reason the poor stay poor is because they want guarantees. They want comfort, not growth. You can't have both, he said. You must choose security or freedom. Freedom requires uncertainty. It means taking risks, making mistakes, and learning from every one of them. Robert remembered when his poor dad told him, "Don't take risks, find a safe job." And when Rich Dad told him, "Take smart risks and learn how to make safety for yourself." That was the difference between employment and empowerment. The poor depend on others for stability. The rich create their own. Rich Dad also taught Robert that taxes and debt could either be enemies or allies, depending on what you know. The rich don't fear taxes, he said. They learn how to use the system. They build corporations that protect and multiply their income. He explained that the government rewards those who solve problems: business owners, investors, innovators. Employees pay the most taxes because they trade time for money, and that's the most heavily taxed form of income. Robert realized that schools teach people how to work for money, but never how money itself works. So he decided to make his education different, to study real estate, marketing, investing, and entrepreneurship. He learned how money flowed through the economy, how people's emotions controlled their decisions, and how knowledge could become the most powerful form of wealth. Rich Dad summarized it this way: "Don't chase money, chase education, because once you're educated financially, money will chase you." That sentence became Robert's core belief. He began to see that wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in freedom, the freedom to choose how to spend your time and the confidence that you can always create value anywhere you go. That was the fourth lesson. Work to learn, not to earn, because in the end, money is only temporary. But skills make you unstoppable. As Robert's financial education grew, Rich Dad began focusing on a crucial truth. Most people spend their lives building someone else's dream. He said, you can be a brilliant employee and still end up broke because while you're busy making money for others, they're using that money to build assets for themselves. Rich Dad explained that this is the great trap of the modern world. We're trained to work hard, pay bills, and hope for retirement, but we never learn how to make money work for us. He said, your job is not your business. Your business is what you build outside your job. Robert asked, what do you mean by that? Rich Dad replied, it means that while you're working to earn your salary, you should also be building assets, investments, side projects, and businesses that create income even when you're not working. He called this lesson, mind your own business. It didn't mean to quit your job recklessly. It meant to use your job as a stepping stone to financial independence. Work at your job to learn, he said, but invest your time after work to build your wealth. Most people, he explained, work hard to climb the corporate ladder, but the rich focus on owning the ladder. He encouraged Robert to track his financial life like a business, to always know what assets he owned, how much income they produced, and how to make them grow. He said, when you start treating your personal finances like a company, you'll begin to think like an entrepreneur, and that's when freedom begins. Robert began buying small investments, a few shares of stock, a small piece of real estate, and small business ideas that others ignored. He didn't always win, but every loss taught him more than any school ever could. Rich Dad explained that wealth is built quietly, not in sudden luck, but in consistent decisions. He said, every dollar you earn is a soldier. If you send your soldiers out to work for you, they'll bring back more soldiers. But if you waste them, they're gone forever. Robert never forgot that metaphor. He started thinking of money not as something to spend, but as something to command. Meanwhile, his poor dad continued to believe in the safety of his paycheck. He worked harder, but his taxes increased and his expenses followed his income. He was trapped in a pattern he couldn't escape. Robert realized that the difference wasn't intelligence or luck, it was focus. The poor focus on income, the rich focus on building assets. One lives month to month, the other builds generation to generation. Rich Dad summed it up simply. You become rich not by working harder, but by working smarter and by owning the source of your income. He encouraged Robert to build things that lasted, a brand, a business, a system, a legacy. Don't spend your life renting your time, he said. Spend it creating something that pays you forever. And that was the fifth lesson, mind your own business. Because if you don't build your own dream, someone else will hire you to build theirs. Years passed, and Robert continued learning from both of his fathers. From his poor dad, he learned discipline, education, and integrity. From his rich dad, he learned courage, risk-taking, and financial intelligence. Both shaped him, but only one led to freedom. Rich Dad often said, the moment you no longer need a paycheck, that's the moment you're truly free. That idea stayed with Robert for life. He saw how millions of people around the world worked endless hours, hoping for raises, pensions, and security, yet few ever achieved true independence. They traded time for money, never realizing that time is the real currency of life. Money can be replaced, Rich Dad said, but time cannot. So he taught Robert to design a life where money was no longer the master, but the servant. Rich Dad's philosophy was simple. Build assets that pay you. Invest in what you understand. Protect your time. Keep learning, always. He believed that financial freedom wasn't about being rich. It was about having choices. The choice to wake up and do what you love. The choice to spend time with your family. The choice to travel, create, and live with purpose, without fear of running out of money. That, he said, is true wealth. Robert once asked his rich dad, "How will I know when I'm truly rich?" Rich Dad smiled and answered, When your money makes more money than you do. That was the definition of freedom, when your assets produce enough income to cover your lifestyle without you needing to trade your time. From that point on, every decision Robert made was guided by one question: will this bring me closer to freedom or keep me a slave to money? He realized that financial education is the great equalizer. You don't need to be born wealthy to become wealthy. You just need to learn how money works. Knowledge turns the poor into investors. Courage turns investors into visionaries. And persistence turns vision into reality. As years went by, Robert achieved his dream: financial independence through business, investments, and teaching. He made it his life's mission to share the lessons his rich dad gave him so that others could escape the same financial traps. His book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, became more than a story. It became a guide for millions searching for a way out of the rat race. He often said, "Money without financial intelligence is money soon gone." And also, the more you learn, the more you earn, not just in dollars, but in freedom. The legacy of Rich Dad wasn't just wealth, it was wisdom, a way of thinking that empowers generations to come. And that was the final lesson. Financial freedom is not about money, it's about control. Control of your time, your emotions, and your future. Because in the end, the richest people are not those who have the most money, but those who have the most freedom. This was Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the story of how two fathers taught one boy the difference between living rich and truly being free.